Welcome, everyone. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and I'm thrilled to have you here today as we dive into mastering the career pivot. Whether you're making a change by choice or out of necessity, this session will equip you with the confidence and the tools to navigate your transition successfully. I have worked across multiple industries in different countries and navigated a few career pivots myself. I know how exciting, but also how intimidating change can feel, especially change of this nature. So, today we'll walk through step by step in a guide to help you confidently transition to a new role that aligns with your strengths, your passions, and your life goals. By the end of this session together today, you'll have a lot more clarity on why and how to pivot, plus actionable steps to take immediately. Let's get started. A little about me as we get started. I've spent over 20 years in global leadership, talent development, and working with people through a lot of career transitions, both my own and people on my team that I've worked with over the years, as well as some of the consulting and coaching that I've done. But I've personally navigated multiple career pivots from nonprofit work to corporate leadership. I sit on a few nonprofit boards, so learning a lot more about board governments in my recent part of my career. But wherever I have worked, I've always really enjoyed working with people throughout industries. And so we'll get a little bit more into transitional aspects of our careers and how those transferable skills go throughout. So you'll get to hear a little bit about that in my own journey and the lessons and things that I've learned along the way that I'm imparting to you, both through my own personal lived experience and through the research, as well as just working through several different types of industries and seeing how different people work, especially in the talent development field. So, my goal is to help professionals like you make career shifts with clarity and confidence. I just a little bit about my personal narrative as I spent some of my early parts of my career in Indonesia, where I worked in both educational global nonprofits and also in community development, and happened to be working in a civil war zone where the big tsunami hit over 20 years ago now. We just had the 20th anniversary not too long ago. And that work had me become a liaison for the UN efforts there. There weren't many expats that lived in that particular area of Indonesia, which is Aceh province. So I learned so much in that time, both about head and heart coming together as a leader, working with different people from all around the world in terms of global leadership in a situation that was very chaotic and rapidly changing and high stakes. So, but my time in international NGOs and nonprofits, as well as disaster relief, in an odd way, prepared me for the work that I've been doing in Silicon Valley in a global tech company where I go across our globe and have a team globally that I lead and a strategy that I've developed called a key leadership program. And some of those skills that I learned working with people from different parts of the world in rapidly changing high stakes situations were some of the transferable skills I brought over into this career. So, lived experience from what a lot of you are going through. And for some of you who've had recently been laid off, I know in Silicon Valley tech companies, there's been layoffs over the past few years. And then recently, sometimes geopolitical events cause different roles to be eliminated. And my heart goes out to you because I've been in a situation before where I had a career pivot that was not really by choice, but sometimes opportunities arise that we wouldn't choose, and we can't really control that. But what we can control is how we respond to that. We can't control what happens to us, but we really can come together with wisdom and advice and knowledge. And that's what I hope to impart to you today, both from my own personal career journey and also from the research that's out there. Okay, well, let's talk about what we're going to do together in this time. So, by the end of this section, you'll understand when and how and why to pivot, but also how to identify your transferable skills. So, we're going to talk about there's sort of this idea a lot of people have out there that some people refer to as imposter syndrome. I do not like that phrase because I think what we often find is that there are certain workplaces that were created more for certain types of people, But when we get different perspectives and different lived experience in business and nonprofit, government, all across industries, education, academia, and we have a variety of perspectives in there, it actually is better for organizations. So from a talent development perspective, that is something that I'm always working on, is helping change systems that make it to where nobody has to even feel that what might be called imposter syndrome, because our systems are created in such a way as to where they're psychologically safe and people can show up with their different experiences, and innovation really increases, and all industries can benefit from innovation, not just business where I work. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll also just get to practical steps around optimizing your LinkedIn and networking, how to do that better, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, doesn't matter. And then create an actionable plan for you that you'll come away with for yourself as to what your next steps are. This will be an interactive session in terms of you're going to have some work to do while you're listening. You'll have chances to pause it and then do some activities for yourself. So, in that way, I encourage you to take notes, to reflect and engage. There's a downloadable guide for additional resources that you can use, or you can just use any piece of paper. It doesn't matter, whatever works best for you. Okay, so why do people change careers? I mean, there's actually many reasons, that we didn't list all of them here. There's a lot actually, but some of the common ones are people pivot careers when they experience burnout or even just close to burnout. Sometimes industry changes, like we see in tech, like government changes, can cause all kinds of ripple effects around the world, even geopolitically. And then sometimes just when it comes to personal growth, that might look like needing to build more wealth for your family as you grow your family. You might have kids going to college. You just need to save up more money for that. You might be in the sandwich generation where you're taking care of parents who are aging, and then you have your own kids you're taking care of. Or taking in a sibling, or somebody who just needs extra care. And so you need to build more wealth to sustain that for your family and for yourself. It could just be that you're bored in your career and you're wanting a challenge. You're wanting to learn something new. You're a lifelong learner. I am too. I totally understand that. And that's been a part of my career pivots as well. I really love to continue to grow and find new information out there. It could be that you have a toxic boss, or a boss that you just don't connect with. A lot of people switch either jobs or even careers when they just don't seem to see eye to eye with their manager, and it just becomes too frustrating. So that could be part of your personal growth. Um, for an example is, I had a podcast listener of my podcast that I host, A World of Difference, and this person was a teacher for many years, but he felt really drained. Burnt out, honestly. And we saw a lot of this happen with people during COVID who were teaching in the online time. Very, very difficult. So he transitioned into more of an entrepreneur. And so he it was able to use his expertise in curriculum development and began to lead retreats for educators. He became a consultant for educational institutions, and he now works remotely with a better work-life balance and goes to in-person work events that he himself schedules at times that work for him, so he can work better in terms of his own way, his personality and his energy comes into his work life a whole lot easier when he is able to be in control of that. So that's just an example of how somebody has burnt out but then found a way to have the kind of work life balance that they want, in terms of whether it's remote or hybrid or in person. People all have different preferences, so that's also been a part of a lot of people's career pivots as of late. If you don't already know and follow Adam Grant, he's really full of great wisdom. I've really enjoyed reading a lot of his research out of Wharton Business School. He's just a very concise but deep writer. And so his way of putting things, if you don't already follow him on LinkedIn, I would recommend it. This is a quote I included here. If you're considering a career change but worried about taking a step backward, remember this: it's better to lose the past 2 years of progress than to waste the next 20. So I agree with Adam. Sometimes it can be hard to pull yourself out of something you've built. Some career pivots can sometimes involve you having to change an industry in such a way as to where those connections and the career that you've built feels like a loss. But I would encourage you to think about your future 5, 10, 20 years, whatever you're thinking ahead of, is the decisions that you make now can really have a long-term and lasting impact on who you want to be. And if you're already feeling a certain level of burnout, it's probably not going to get better if you don't see the systems around you changing. So All the more reason to be more proactive. I know everybody's in a different situation, but these are just sort of this is some wisdom I found along the way. And Adam Grant and others who write about career pivots and all types of things related to business and careers. So here's some stats for you. Did you know that 50% of workers have made a career switch and the average person changes jobs 12 times in their lifetime? I was pretty blown away when I first saw that. This job change of 12 times comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics here in the US. According to LinkedIn, we see 50% of workers have made a career switch. So they have a lot of data. And the LinkedIn platform, they did a LinkedIn survey that found 70% of career changers report being happier. So that's good news. If you're into a career pivot, the chances of you being happier are pretty high there. These numbers show that pivots are normal, very normal, and often lead to greater fulfillment. So if you're considering a change, you're not alone. You're in great company here. I myself have been a part of one, and others that are also in this lesson with us here today are also in the same boat as you. Okay. This is a question I get quite a bit about transferable skills. And I would say that in my kind of first major career pivot, I also had trouble figuring that out. So I did work with several people who helped me see that for myself. And so I would encourage you, even as you're looking at this section for yourself, that you also get others involved in it with you. So we're going to unpack it a little bit, and I'll tell you the way I sort of got people around me to help me figure it out. But by and large, that process, going through it myself, it's a little more, I guess, easy for me to see it with other people because of having gone through it myself. So I would say here's some transferable skills to consider. It's certainly not exclusive, but I wanted to sort of highlight these that are kind of broad categories. Transferable skills like communication, leadership, problem solving, adaptability, they're very valuable across all industries. So, whatever you're pivoting from and pivoting to, I want you to take a deep, hard look at these four areas. And then there's a lot of details and nuance in between it. But let's just think about if you've led projects, if you've solved conflicts, you've mentored others officially or unofficially, you already have skills that apply to new fields. I've worked with someone who moved from video production in a nonprofit to script writing, and he used his production expertise to excel in visualizing a stage production and creative arts. So sometimes it's going to seem like a very adjacent pivot, and other times it might seem very, very different. But when you look at transferable skills, that's really the gold in all of the career pivot conversation. So, what that looked like for me is I kind of wrote out my resume. I had trouble sometimes even writing words that might go from, for example, nonprofit to business, because the wording can be quite different in those two, even though we're talking about the same transferable skills. I was doing a lot of this before AI became so prominent. So AI can be very helpful when you put in sort of the skills that you have in your current industry and then asking it to write that in a tone of whatever your new industry is. For example, if you said you were great at fundraising with data driven storytelling in your nonprofit, and then you ask ChatGPT, for example, how could that be a skill that's transferable into business and use that wording? It might come out with something around sales for you, wording related to that, or it might come out with something that even is a board skill of fundraising on a corporate board, for example. So that is just something to consider. I'm always recommending people use ChatGPT or even the AI embedded features of LinkedIn, which are something I wish I could have taken advantage of in my career pivot, but they're certainly helping a lot of people now. So I encourage that. But also, in addition to partnering with AI, which I encourage you to do, I really hope you partner with people in your life. So what that looked like for me is I built what I kind of talked about, my own personal board of directors or my own tribe of healers and pivoter guides and advisors for me. So that looked like a career coach. I worked with Dr. Eric Woodard, highly recommend him. So look him up, and he's on LinkedIn, and he also does occasionally just does LinkedIn lives where you can sort of join and see what he's up to. But I highly encourage you to work with him personally because he helped me significantly in my career pivot. And a lot of the transferable skills were things I was able to identify by working with him. I also just had people in the industry I was hoping to work in as well as people I had worked with in my previous industry I was pivoting from, to look over my resume with me, to kind of talk with me about what they saw that I did well, what my strengths were. And those things helped me sort of find out what my transferable skills were. And then looked at, um, I would also say this job search and this career pivot isn't just all business. It's not all just resume writing. It's not all identifying transferable skills. There's also an element of it that is requiring you to do a lot of introspection and self assessment. It requires a lot of self leadership, which is the hardest type of leadership, I think. Self awareness is a really hard aspect of leadership development. In fact, in the global trainings I do with the key leadership program I have, I train on something called the fundamental four. And those are four key areas of leadership development that have been identified and researched by the Center for Creative Leadership, with areas that are just really key to focus on. And so, one of those, the first one we talk about, is self awareness. A lot of leaders, a lot of employees are not self-aware. It's very difficult work that takes time and a lot of proactivity. So that meant I had a therapist, I had a career coach, I had a leadership coach, I had friends in my life that had known me for a long time. I had all types of people that I brought around me. I went in, actually was in a cohort of people who had been in a toxic work environment, which was something I had experienced before one of my career pivots. And just walking through that cohort with others, and we would read articles and get together and discuss. And it ended up in this retreat together. And during that time, these were all people that spoke into my whole world of pivoting careers. So I think that my advice is, as you're looking for your transferable skills, that you build a village around you of people who will help you pivot, build a board of directors who can help you see, and people who will give you good advice. So that is my biggest tip on transferable skills and identifying those. But that leads me to, as I mentioned, self awareness. We're going to do a little bit of a self assessment exercise, and I'm going to explain it to you. And then you can feel free to pause this after the explanation and take as much time as you need. That could be a short amount of time, it could be a long time, whatever time is necessary for you to come away with the 5 things and the 3 things and the 2 things that we're going to work through here. So let's do this exercise. I want you to, either on a piece of paper, or maybe you want to type it out, either on your phone or on your laptop, or you can use the guide that's you can download. And basically, I just want you to write down 5 tasks that you excel at. Just 5 tasks you excel at. If you need to pause it long enough to be able to reach out to some other people to find that out by sending them a text or giving them a call, take whatever time you need to identify those. The next thing you're going to identify is 3 strengths. 3 strengths that you have as a person that you bring into your work. And then the next one is 2 major problems that you have solved. So that's 5 tasks you excel at, 3 strengths, and 2 major problem solving moments that you've been a part of helping solve. And then I want you to compare these with job descriptions in your target industry. So you're going to probably need to pause this long enough to be able to help you identify some of those job descriptions. You can find them on Indeed or LinkedIn, or just by Googling your top 5 favorite places you want to work and looking for their career section and what job descriptions they have out there. This will help you not only know who you are as a person and what you're bringing to a workplace, but it'll help you see how your skills align with those new opportunities you're looking for. And one of my coaching clients did this and realized his relationship building skills made him a great fit for both government and nonprofit roles. And that was something he hadn't really seen as clearly before until we started to kind of identify those together. So, this is where I will encourage you to pause and take as long as you need. So, please go ahead and pause now, and I'll see you in the next part. All right, welcome back. Right now, we're going to talk about overcoming invisibility and self muting. You may be wondering, what in the world is that? And you may be very clear on what that is. But just as we sort of walk through that self assessment exercise, you may have found yourself coming up with a lot of self doubt, wondering if you could really speak up about who you are as a person, wondering if anybody's even noticed the work you've been doing. So, a lot of things can get in our way as we overcome our own obstacles and the self leadership process. So, many of us battle self doubt questions like, am I qualified? You might be like, statistically speaking, women more so than men will look at a job description, and you've probably heard this before. And if they're not typically going to have every single skill required and have had every single part of the experience, often women won't even apply. Whereas statistically, and this is not true in every case, men won't need to, perceive themselves as needing all the skills and all of the experience. Part of this is because, generally speaking, the research also shows that when we are seeing recruiters and people hiring or even promoting within a company, generally speaking, women will only be promoted or recruited and hired for their experience, but men are often promoted, hired, recruited for their potential. And I think that's why, generally speaking, and not in every case, men and women will often look at a job description differently and whether they're qualified because of the system and how the system views that. And it's all been very cultivated over hundreds of years. So you're stepping into something that's not something you created, but it's something you're a part of. So that's why we have to do a lot of self work to overcome systems that hold us back. Um, and so you may have had the question, will I have to completely start over as I start in a career pivot in a new industry? That's a fair question. And it's not always the same answer depending on what, your industry is that you're going into and what job you're going into. But I will say that recognizing these fears and naming them is the actual first step in overcoming them. I'm not a therapist. That is not a career pivot you should ever expect from me. That's not part of my skill set. But I will say consulting and coaching and having been a person who has been benefited from great therapists who've been a part of my, you know, village that I've built around me, my board of directors, my people that speak into my life and help me with self-assessment and self-awareness, is that recognizing those fears is the first step to overcoming them. So even my career coach that I mentioned that I work with, Dr. Eric Woodard, we were able to identify some of those fears and some of the self-muting and invisibility areas that I was working through as I was going into job interviews and showing who I was as a person and the skills that I have to bring. So sometimes there's fear that if um, you show up and you say things a certain way, that you're going to have, likability points taken away from you. And that's a very difficult thing, especially we see in some of the research for women. The Likability Trap, that's a book I actually read during my career pivot, is that being warm and being strong is both, these are both things that are needed in a lot of leadership roles, but sometimes that needle is very difficult to thread for women. So women can often be seen as too warm or too strong, and therefore the likability is just very, very difficult. It's a much more narrow path than what often we allow men to have space in. And so that can get all up in your head about, what if I um, say things in a certain way where I sound too warm or too strong, right? So these are things that therapists are great in helping us work through. Career coaches can be great in helping you work through. I've really benefited from that work myself. It's hard work, but it's worth it for you to show up as your full self and who you are. I've worked with professionals who felt unseen in their industries, only to realize that advocating for themselves can bring up realities of how workspaces were not created to see everyone's work equally, unfortunately. So we're going to tackle some strategies around how to change that, but it's worth just naming that whatever industry you're working in, many industries are not designed for us to see the different work everybody does in the same way. Some of it is naturally more visible because of our own personal narratives of our own upbringings, and some of it is just cultural, and some of it is just the way that particular business or nonprofit or academic institution or government institution works. So, increasing your visibility is unfortunately not equitable. There are some people that their work just gets noticed no matter what, and others, often women, whose work is invisible and even at times unpaid. A lot of the unpaid labor, both in volunteer work, in nonprofits, in schools like PTAs, um, even faith based locations and institutions, or even when we look at the workplace in a business setting where the emotional labor can often be something that women are expected to bear, um, and therefore it can be an unpromotable task that they are tasked with, or just to help the culture feel more integrated. Sometimes that is unpromotable or unnoticed work that can take quite a bit of time. It could be, and it doesn't, it's not exclusive to women, but it just statistically, we see this more happening with women. So if your work is invisible, or certainly if you've had your work stolen by someone at work and they've claimed it as their own, this can be very, very frustrating. But I'm here to say that we have some strategies to work on that visibility, and also to stop self muting, but to really own your voice and bring your voice and your fullness to your career pivot and your new job and your new role in a way that really allows others to be authentically who they are. Because I'm a huge advocate for authentic leaders, showing up as yourself, leading yourself well so that others feel the freedom to lead themselves well too and show up for who they are. And that's where we see a lot of innovation really happen. And it's really cool. All right. So, some of you may struggle with just not only self muting and invisibility, but just not feeling confident to even do this career pivot. And so I just want to say that once again, I worked with a lot of people in my career pivot, especially career coaches and therapists who helped me to see who I was and to kind of have ways to repeat that for myself. I worked with just a life coach for a while, and we worked through the Enneagram. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a personality test. I've taken multiple ones. The Myers-Briggs and just all the different ones, right? But this particular is an Enneagram coach, and she had me put on Post-its on the wall the different parts of my Enneagram type. And to this day, I keep them on the wall because I had been in a toxic work environment where I felt like my personality had sort of changed and my voice even was taken, and I was very silenced and was self muting as a result of being in that environment. And so really owning who I was and stepping into who I was kind of gave me confidence in myself. My personality kind of came back and my voice came back. But it was like sort of these daily, not affirmations, but just post-it notes on my wall that I could look at and say, oh, that's who I am. I want to show up as myself. I don't want to be anyone else, but I want to be me. And I have a values cards on my desk that I keep there, and I look at them for big or small decisions. Even now, I worked in a cohort of women. I was the youngest one in the group, which was amazing because I could benefit from the work of women who had done this before. And we were in this leadership cohort. Um, and we did this values exercise where we laid out all these different cards with different values on it. And by process of elimination, came up with our own personal values. And I keep those on my desk, and they remind me of my values and why I want to show up as me. So part of this is just the world will break you down, certain industries particularly, but in the process of finding a new job, it can be very difficult emotionally, relationally, financially, spiritually. And so reminding yourself of who you are with these daily truths, reminding you of your values. And I had some both hype songs and calming songs. So I have some Spotify songs that I had on my list. I had one song that I would play before job interviews just to calm my nervous system before I walked in so I could show up as a non-anxious presence and just be calm. And that was, if you're wanting to know, the one that really helped me for a period of time was somebody. I was on a nonprofit board, and our executive director recommended this song at one point, and it really was gold for me. It's Bobby McFerrin. If you remember him, he's the "Don't Worry, Be Happy" guy. I've seen him in person a couple of times at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. He comes usually once a year and leads the congregation in this very spontaneous. Song making session. I don't really know how to describe it other than the very Bobby McFerrin type of way. But there's this very calming cathedral sound of a choir where they do a rendition of Psalms 23. And so it just was very calming. If you're familiar with that one, it's just very visual and beautiful and always calm me. So I would play that a lot before job interviews during one of my career pivots. So I also had hype songs, just songs that made me feel good about myself. And sometimes I needed to be more up, and sometimes I wanted to be more calm. And I would just recommend music if that's something that helps you. Also, visualization techniques. There's a lot of research around this. Some people will have like this phrase called manifesting they use around it. There is something to it that does seem kind of voodoo. But whether or not it is magical in any way, I don't know. But I do know that the research shows that when you visualize, there is something embodied about it where you can imagine the sights and the sounds and the smells and use all of your senses, that somehow it puts your brain in a state of actually being in that moment. A lot of us who are public speakers use this as we go in, just imagining ourselves doing a good job and crushing it and having good engagement and that type of thing. But imagining the lights and the sounds and the smells can really put your brain in that moment in a positive way and just say, that it's going to go well. And then research shows that imagining it and all of the embodiment of it, your likelihood of it going well is much better. So before you go into a job interview, it's really helpful to visualize that. And I highly recommend that. And also just imagining yourself in that role and that job that you want in the organization you're trying to work with. All of that kind of visualization can be really, really helpful. And then also journaling. I don't know if you're a big journaler. I'm not a journal everyday person, but research shows if you write it out, you don't have good handwriting, but pen to paper can be really helpful in processing things in a different part of the brain, also helping you kind of retain it and remember it. So, which is why the old fashioned way of taking notes in class is really helpful. But I know some people struggle with the pen to paper for different reasons, for sensory reasons, and have to do some work with occupational therapy on that. I totally understand. But if at all possible, even if it's a small amount, just writing pen to paper. Some people like using different colors. That can be helpful if you struggle with any sort of visual processing, just to have different color coding, or even if you don't, it's very helpful for the brain to remember things with different colors. So I would just say keeping a journal of moments where you adapted and thrived in the past. This will remind you of the resilience that you have. And sometimes we need to be reminded in a time like a career pivot, which can be very, very difficult on us both. Sometimes, people will have nightmares at night because it's scary. It's just feels like jumping off a cliff sometimes. I felt that way myself, and very, very difficult, especially if you've experienced being laid off or being fired or came out of a toxic work environment. If any of it was a shock, you didn't expect to lose your job and you have a family, like my heart goes out to you, because I've had a version of that I've experienced myself. And it's very, very, very hard to be dealing with all that trauma as while you're trying to pivot into a new career. It's very difficult. So make sure you take time to just care for yourself, bring people around you that are going to help you feel good about yourself, and even take time just to be cozy as a person. Your body's been through quite a bit, but remind yourself of your resilience, and those journaling moments can be very helpful. Confidence isn't something we wake up with. It's built through action. Confidence isn't something that you just get, like you snap your fingers. You get it by doing, which is why this whole image here of this man about to climb the stairs, like, just do it. I mean, just start walking, just take the next step. Doesn't have to be perfect, but just start moving in a forward direction, and then confidence will come. And also just taking time to just self-reflect. You see somebody there with a piece of paper and a pencil and a cup of coffee. Looks like a flat white. Those are my favorite. Where they make the pretty pictures in the coffee shops. And sometimes it's just being in a different location that might help you. Maybe you journal better being outdoors, or being in a coffee shop, or being in a special room in your house, or on the subway. I'm currently recording this in Lake Tahoe. My family's out skiing for ski week, and I'm here in the cabin getting some work done here, recording this and looking outside at this beautiful snow and these pine trees and the sun shining. And it's just really beautiful. And I find myself finding new ways to think about my own life and career when I'm in a new space. So it may need that confidence is built in you by just being somewhere different, change of scenery, and also outdoors. The beach has been really important for me. Getting away in a beach house or a cabin have been really some of the ways that I've sort of come up with some of the ideas of who I wanted to, become more of as a person, the skills I wanted to hone, and the types of places I wanted to go in my career. And looking up at big staircases like the one in this photo can feel daunting unless you kind of take time away for yourself to just think and breathe and even just be cozy by a fireplace with a cozy blanket and a cup of coffee or hot cocoa with whipped cream, whatever, whatever is makes you feel good and makes your body feel safe and relaxed and comfortable. And I just want to invite you, if this is a moment you want to pause this and go find that space for yourself before you move on in this session, that is completely a great idea. I just find that the way our bodies feel and the way we treat our bodies is a direct correlation with how we do in these career pivot times. And I worked with somebody during my own career pivot who was a therapist specializing in DBT therapy, which is dialectical behavior therapy. And she encouraged me to journal a list of things that made my body feel good and safe. And every day I would just do 3 to 5 of those things. And until now, I have that practice, even though it's been years. For me, floating in a pool just felt really nice. So it was in the summer, I was able to do that quite a bit. But also, I had my list of like, I like to eat strawberries and cream. And so I do that sometimes, or go for a walk and smell the flowers. Things that just made my body feel really good were positioned me to think at a higher level and to feel safe in a career pivot that often felt very, very difficult at times. So, once again, feel free to pause this, start it back up in a little bit once you've taken some time for yourself, whether it's a walk out in the sunshine or just whatever you need. And then we'll come back together in a second. All right, welcome back if you took a break. Right now, I just want to inspire you a little bit with some real success stories. Um, you're stuck in the before and you're kind of in this liminal space between the before and the after. But I want to mention a few stories. There's so many I could tell you. But here's just a few that might give you some ideas of how the career pivot could look for you. So, Greg was an educational strategist who transitioned into finance. He leveraged his understanding of analytics and took a short certification course, and now he leads investment projects at a finance firm. His story shows how even just small adjustments can create really big career shifts. Another example is Michelle, who left nonprofit to become an entrepreneur with a successful therapy practice. She used her experience with an educational nonprofit in training and project management to transition seamlessly. So, here's a couple of examples to let you know how those transferable skills can transfer from one career to another successfully. So, we're going to talk now about the power of a personal career brand. Now, I know a personal brand can feel really icky, and I do share those actual feelings with you. Especially because it can feel so I don't know, narcissistic when it comes from some people in particular, and maybe because they actually are narcissists, I don't know. But it feels very individualistic. So it took me a while to sort of work through this. And I think there probably could be better words out there besides brand. Open to suggestions if you have them. But this seemed to sort of encompass the word in the best way from those who I've worked with, once again, in my board of advisors of people who are in marketing and understand that the power of a story is what sells you as a person for getting a job. And there is an element of getting into a career pivot where you're sort of selling yourself as a person that you would want them to hire for this role. And it does require a lot of storytelling, which was a transferable skill that fortunately I had going from nonprofit to business during that career pivot. But I want to make the case for you, especially in the way recruiting works nowadays, that this is really more important than it's ever been. It's the way we present ourselves. It matters more than it probably ever has. And just industries, especially that are very competitive, but also just the way AI is becoming so much a part of the recruiting process. So, your personal brand is really just your professional story, what your career has been. It highlights your strengths. You get to showcase your expertise and make sure your online presence reflects your career goals. I really want you to be authentic in this process. I want you to show your values, and you get a chance to do that. You get a chance to craft that story instead of letting others make it up for you. So it's you owning, you being in the driver's seat of how you're presented to the world in this way. Employers and recruiters, they do look beyond resumes. They look at your digital footprint. So make sure it tells the right story. And, if you've only had personal social medias, it may be time to consider having professional social medias. I pivoted in that way, was I just had private social media, where it was more about kind of me and my family. And then I began to have, it took me a while to get there because I also felt really ick about that. But once I worked through all of that and therapy and the reasons that that was a problem for me, because I had, I guess, been around a lot of people who just seemed to sort of fake themselves. And I didn't want to be fake. I wanted to be who I was. So once I kind of figured that out for myself and got over how it felt a little icky, I sort of began to be really excited about it. About, I do have something to say. And I really want to encourage other people to be themselves. And so that's sort of the value that I bring to my own branding, my own social media, and the ways that I'm trying to be authentically myself and encourage other people to be authentically themselves. So just want you to think through that a little bit. And there's ways to do that that are you can find a lot of experts out there on personal branding, and that might be a course you want to consider going through with somebody else. And if you need recommendations, I could recommend. So LinkedIn is not the only place, but one of the places you want to consider when you are showing who you are to recruiters and to people who would want to hire you. Sometimes I will talk to people that are looking for people to be on their corporate board as a board member or board chair or just board advisor even, or even people that are looking for executives to uh, fill a role in an executive role in a company. And sometimes, even more than the resume, they want to know what your LinkedIn looks like. So, this is really, really important. So, I encourage you just to update your headline to reflect your target role and rewrite your summary to showcase your strengths, engage with industry posts, and connect strategically. These small changes can really open doors to new opportunities, especially with some keywords in there. There are professionals out there who can help you craft this that are LinkedIn experts. And there's also something I wish I would have had in my career pivot, AI tools that I mentioned earlier that can help you with wording and either use ChatGPT, LinkedIn own embedded AI tools connecting through that, or there's something you may not know about, but I recently found out about by somebody that I sit on a board with on the Silicon Valley executive board of How Women Lead. And she told me about this Bordy. If you've not known about that, it's actually quite fun. Bordy is somebody on LinkedIn. So it's Boardy on LinkedIn. You can connect with Bordy, and Bordy you can do phone calls and then DM together on LinkedIn about your career and in your case, a career pivot. So Bordy can introduce you to people in the industry you might want to get to know. Bordy can help you craft your LinkedIn profile, your headline, your summary, and just give you wording that will, as you have the conversation with Bordy ask questions like, what do you like? What are some of your things you're proud of in your career? So just having this whole conversation, it's like working with a bit of a career coach, but with AI. So something you might want to check out. I found it quite interesting and actually really helpful. But yes, LinkedIn is very, very important. So make sure that you polish that up. And I would consider that to be a very top priority in your career pivot. All right. Reach out to professionals in your target roles. I really would ask you to consider this for 15-minute chats. Now, 15 minutes just seems to be long enough to get introduced to each other just briefly, but also not so long that somebody might be too busy to say yes. You could pitch out there 15 to 20 minutes. Busy people tend to have that time if you give them, a 2-week or 3-week span of when to schedule and a couple of options. And then you can ask questions like, what skills helped you succeed? What challenges did you face? So, this is something I wish I had known more about when I started my career pivot. I focused a lot more back in that time years ago on just writing my resume for the new role I was looking at and looking at job descriptions and then switching out keywords all before AI. So just it was very time consuming, and also having to learn new wording from nonprofit to business. It just took so much time because I was on a high learning curve with that as well. But actually, now I wish I had known. I wish I could go back to tell my younger self that the biggest way to spend my time would be informational interviews. And I did not know that. And it makes sense because really people hire who they know. And if they don't know that person well, it's those soft introductions that also can be really helpful. As you know, we do have these ATS machines and AI that helps look through resumes, but it really is so much more powerful to have a personal connection where you're a real life person. So I was doing a lot of career pivot during a like shutdown time of COVID, and in person was just didn't exist in my job search for several months there. And so I had to do everything virtually, and I had to build a whole new network virtually, and that makes it much harder. But if you can do informational interviews, even if they're video calls, but especially if you could just meet for coffee, just be willing to drive to where that person is, pay for the coffee if you can. I know some people have just been laid off and you have a lot of financial challenges, but if there's any way you could put that in your budget, or maybe if people ask how they could help you, you could say, could you give me money for coffee? Because I'm having coffees with people. People might be willing to kind of help you out with that as well. And then you could pay for the coffee of the person that you're taking out. And then always follow up with gratitude and stay connected. Informational interviews really are the secret weapon of career pivots. You're probably familiar with Simon Sinek. His TED Talk has been one of the most downloaded, and he's written some books. He talks a lot about your why. I would encourage you to also check out what he has to say about that, because it's not just the what and the how of the career pivot, but it's why. What is your why? Why are you doing this? Why? What is your why in life? And how do you bring that into work? What are you all about? And if you are having trouble figuring that out, maybe ask Bordy to have that conversation with you, or talk it back and forth on, I always say, my friend ChatGPT. There's a lot of also, Microsoft Copilot is something I use. And there's just a lot of AI tools, but also talk to people that know you and just say, ask what they think your why is if you're having trouble with it. Talk about the things that excite you. What do you talk about a lot? What really gets you excited? That's probably your why. And companies have that. So, like, a lot of us know the why for Apple. They have these really cool computers. I'm recording on a MacBook. I use an iPhone, both personally and for work. I have two phones, and I have Apple AirPods, the whole thing, just an Apple person. But we don't necessarily just buy their products because they're good products. When they sell their products, what is their tagline? What do they say? What's their why? It's think different. So they could just say, hey, buy these computers. They're really great. But it's think different. That's their why. So what is your why? I think, for me, like helping people live differently and work differently and bringing their differences to the table is part of my why, which is why I host a podcast called A World of Difference, where we bring our differences around the table to make a difference together across industries and in our communities across the globe. But this quote from Simon Sinek, I included it because I thought it was a really impactful one. He says, the true value of networking doesn't come from how many people we can meet, but rather how many people we can introduce to others. So I want you to think about that in terms of, remember how I said I struggled around personal branding and even like having professional social media? Part of it is because the element that I value so much is I didn't want it to be all about me. And so that's also part of what I struggle with self muting, because when I put myself out there in job interviews, sometimes I just felt like um, it was all about me, and I had done work with other people. So I had to learn wording that I was comfortable with. Sometimes I say we, sometimes I say I, and it kind of hurt me in job interviews to not say I did this a lot, but I just wanted to stay true to my values and find a way I could do it. But even as I network, I'm always saying, who can I introduce you to? And I find, especially in the networking of women, that's been a very supportive environment for me, because in a world where there's a lot of sort of bro clubs at work, or systems like in Silicon Valley, people have described this bro oligarchy that kind of is an intersection of business and tech and government, that sometimes women get intentionally pushed out. So women supporting each other, we often don't have the luxury of going against each other, but being supportive of one another as we network and introducing each other to others has been really helpful. And I would say men having sponsored me, championed me, opened doors for me as part of my network has been very key in helping me in my career. I'm so grateful for them. My career coach, like I mentioned, is a man, and he worked in DC politics. Dr. Eric Woodard, he's written several books. He worked for Hillary Clinton as her office manager. He also worked and headed up the internship at the Smithsonian. He's been through career pivots himself. And I would just say men and women supporting each other, women supporting women, men supporting men, making sure we're bringing a lot of diversity and different perspectives and lived experiences around the table helps us. And it's fun. I think networking can be fun. But I recognize some are introverts that are listening to this, and it can be quite overwhelming. And so that's why I still just think, scheduling 15 minutes where it's very brief, making sure you spent time alone, refueling yourself, thinking through things, being, your introverted self authentically before you go into these times, maybe really outlining exactly what you want to say, having your talking points can be, helpful and having you be prepared. And maybe you just don't do as many as an extrovert would, but you don't need as many because all it takes is one person introducing you to the right person to get that job. And then, once you meet that person, asking them if there's somebody in your network that, they might want to know too, because don't assume just because you're the one in the career pivot that they might not want to know somebody in your own network as well. So just being reciprocal about that relationship and not transactional, but more transformational with each other about it, I find to be very, very helpful. All right. So next, we're going to talk about setting SMART goals. And what that means is we find that in the research, if your goals are just too vague, you're probably not going to achieve them. So we're going to talk about specific, achievable, measurable, relevant, and time bound. You've probably seen this before. It's not a secret by any means. And so an example would be, complete an online certification in 6 weeks or connect with 10 industry professionals this month. So when you set clear milestones, the pivot process becomes manageable and actionable. Specific means you want details. Measurable and my measurable and achievable are mixed up there. Sorry about that. Measurable as you want to be able to track your progress. Achievable, you want to make sure it's realistic that you can actually do it. Relevant, it needs to really be aligned with your values and your goals, right? And then time bound, you want to set a time frame on that. So it's more likely that you will achieve it. And we know also in the research, and I train on this globally with my company, all across the world with our leaders, our managers, and our individual contributors, that if you write it down, the research shows you're more likely to achieve that goal. And then another thing that really increases it as well is telling it to someone. So sharing that goal with someone else who can hold you accountable. And those two extra steps involved in it really do increase your chances. So write this goal down, share it with somebody, and you're very likely to achieve it. In fact, I think that you will. And this is a career action plan. I just want to give you this roadmap for yourself that you can adapt to your own personal journey. And it should include researching industries. And you can look up whether on LinkedIn or just Google the different industries you're looking into, finding more about them in terms of how they're changing. Is it a growing market or is it not? All that information would be helpful to know. Updating your LinkedIn, like I mentioned, and your resume. And there are experts out there in those two areas that you can get to help you out, or you can use ChatGPT or the LinkedIn AI tools or Bordy, or even just friends that might be willing to help you that are working in recruiting and HR roles in different organizations would be really helpful as well. 3 is to conduct those informational interviews. Like I said, 15 minutes is a good amount of time. Apply for roles. That's the part that, you want to try to do some of, but I don't want you spending a ton of time on just cold turkey finding roles and spending a lot of time putting the words from your resume in a way that match that job description. Yes, I want you to do some of that, but I would say do more of 3 than 4. And that's where I made a lot of mistakes in my career pivot that I was doing during part of the COVID shutdown time, where I wish I had done more informational interviews. I think it would have happened for me a little faster, as opposed to the very grueling work of like just, applying and then having your resume go through an ATS system and probably be spit out because you didn't have enough keywords in there. Or you had an out of the box resume, because career pivots can often be that way too, right? Um, and then, applying for roles, like I said, and then continuous skills development. So continue to develop your skills, like sign up for a certification, sign up for, um, different LinkedIn courses that you could take, or there's a lot of different options out there. Coursera, there's different ones that you could get I've been going through a finance course at Yale through Coursera, and you just pay like a little bit per month, and then you end up with a certification at the end. I'm almost finished with it. I just love learning. So it's just a Yale course in just basic finance. So learning all kinds of details about stock markets and things like that. It's just a lot of fun. I like to learn. So just continue to develop your skills either in the industry that's very specific to what you're going to, maybe getting a PMP certification, some type of HR certification. If you're trying to work in disaster relief, maybe I have a trauma informed certification that's been very helpful for me in all industries. So, that type of thing, continuing to develop your skills. It's a step by step process. And the more strategic you are, the smoother your transition will be. But having those extra certifications on your resume can be really helpful in your career pivot. I love Brene Brown. If you don't know this about me, I quote her all the time, both at work and in my podcast and in life to other people. So many of us do. We love her. She's a vulnerability and shame researcher and just written several amazing books and has also a great TED Talk as well, that multiple actually. But she says this: courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen. I'm going to say it again. Courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen. The be seen is really hard for some of us. It was hard for me sometimes. The invisibility part was that if I show who I am I going to get hurt? Am I going to be perceived in a way that I'm misunderstood? Whatever the things are that you're working through from previous work environments, or from maybe attachment issues growing up in a family of origin, or maybe a high control religious environment, or just different communities and cultures and spaces, we bring all of that as a part of ourselves into our work and our career pivots. But I would ask you just to wholeheartedly have courage and show up. Just show up and let yourself be seen for who you are authentically. Okay, we're going to recap for a little bit. We covered when and why to pivot, how to assess your skills and build confidence, optimize your LinkedIn, and take action. An email will be coming to you to invite you to download the Career Pivot Guide and connect with me for more on career leadership and making a difference. I thank you so much for joining today. I look forward to seeing where your career journey takes you. If you have questions, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. A DM is a great way to find me. I get a lot of messages though, so I try to reply to all of them between global business travel and conducting leadership summits and podcasting, and working in a very busy tech company in Silicon Valley. But yeah, send me a DM if you have any questions. And I wish you all the best in your career pivot. It's a very exciting time for you. Here's where you can contact me. You can join me also at A World of Difference podcast for more on authentic leadership in all career industries, as well as just life. I share my own career journey, including my own career pivot after a toxic work environment years ago in the Our Story series, episode 100. And for about 6 episodes, I share along with my husband about a career pivot we did after a toxic work environment. And we share about what that environment was like and how we survived it and how we moved forward, and even whistleblowing about that experience. So I share global leadership tips also in the podcast about how to spot toxic rock stars, red flags in a toxic work culture, and how to cultivate psychological safety in work cultures where managers play a very key role. Something I really enjoy training on in my current workplace. And I'd love for you to join me at A World of Difference every Wednesday for conversations that make a world of difference. If no one else has told you, you matter. You have God-given gifts that can make the world of work and just the world in general a better place. And I hope you help others shine their lights while you also let your own light shine. I want you to look inside at who you are with all the mistakes, all the shame, all the trauma, and do the self-awareness and self-reflection work so that you can show up as someone who's ready to listen to understand others and be a kind leader that the world desperately needs right now. I am cheering you on as you dig deep, look inside, and shine your light for the world to see. Thank you.